We always say at True Theater that everyone has a story to share, and the only difference between a stranger and a friend is the sharing of that story. Tonight, you're going to make 5 new friends.
The first of whom is a producer, director, writer, editor who has racked up 23 years and counting as a professor of electronic media and broadcasting at Northern Kentucky University, where he teaches on media aesthetics and screenwriting, among other things, and leads the aforementioned student-staffed NKU Video Production House, Norris Media. He also serves on the board of directors of the Northern Kentucky Forum and True Theater. And despite all these titles, he identifies more as a family man, which will be eminently clear in just a moment. Please give it up for Chris Strobel.
Good evening. When I was around 9 years old, my parents moved my brother and me to a house on 7 acres of land in the middle of nowhere. There was like cow pasture here and cornfield over there. It was a cool house. There was like the walls of the house were the kitchen were like 12 inches wide because it was a log cabin. They just kind of covered it over when they built the rest of the house. And there was an outhouse. We had indoor plumbing, but there was an outhouse, and that was cool. And it was just so remote, and it was a fun experience for the time that we lived there. But when you're that remote, you really have to, be a tight-knit family. And we really were. My brother and I, Greg and I, basically never fought. My parents showed us nothing but kindness and love. And I think my dad really liked that separation. And when we were building what became their forever home, a couple of miles closer to town, but still somewhat in the middle of nowhere, it was still very rural. And that house had a feature on it. There was a deck around the house, and my brother and my dad, and I helped and probably hindered a little, build a gazebo. And that gazebo got a lot of use. And there was a porch swing that Mom and Dad would swing on, and there were benches that we could sit with them. And we would sit out there and we would talk and we would listen and we would just kind of be. And like I said, I think my dad really loved that. Because my dad was a lover. He was a very genuine and romantic man. He married, my dad's name is Chuck, and he married his high school sweetheart, Peggy, when he was 21 and she was 18. And that kind of defined a lot of our lives. One of the best pieces of advice he ever gave me, I was having lunch with him and talking about this young woman that I was kind of interested in trying to figure out how to date, and he's like, I think he saw something. He stopped, he said, whatever it takes to get the girl. It was good advice. 33 years later, Kim and I are still very happily married. And he's out there somewhere. But it wasn't all just that kind of love. He showed his love through action. And through action, what I mean by that is that when we were involved, if my brother and I were involved with something, Dad was involved with it. Now, maybe not in the nuts and bolts. I think he liked having other people to be able to have that hands-on with us. But he would make sure that the organization ran well. So like Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, he was the district commissioner. For the high school band, he was the booster president. Little League Baseball, Babe Ruth Baseball, commissioner again. If we were involved, he was involved. And I think that showed us a lot about how to give to us, but also to others and those in those organizations. For example, when he was leading the band boosters, he organized for the band to go to a parade in Washington, D.C., and I had just graduated, so I accompanied as a chaperone. And in that interaction, it allowed me to really see and understand how much time and effort it took for him to give that opportunity for the band members to just play and have fun and experience it. And that giving to the community garnered him some respect, not just some respect. It also, another example, when that baseball I was talking about, Babe Ruth baseball, I made the All-Star team one year. It was the very last year I played. I am pretty certain I was the last player selected because I was a first baseman and I played an inning or maybe two in right field. And I'm sure that why I was selected was because of what my dad brought to the organization. I accept that. I'll take it. He also took care of the community in his professional life. He was an environmental chemist for a paper recycling plant in Cayuga, Indiana. And sometimes he would also test water purity levels for cities in the area. His chemistry background, when the U.S. Army was wanting to dispose of some of the VX gas at the VX depot in the area, he was on the commission, so he negotiated with the U.S. military about the best and safest way to get rid of that really just horrific chemical weapon from World War II. And let me tell you, the entire region was happy when that was gone. Right around that time, a little after, though, we really started seeing some signs that early onset Alzheimer's was impacting his cognitive abilities. And that love that he had been expressing to all of these people and us, it didn't go away, but it narrowed and it softened a little bit. And then sometimes it hardened because there was anger. And I think there was some obstinance. I mean, because he was a very proud man, self-made, successful, and he could feel his brain betraying him. And then there were some hallucinations and some incidents that were a little bit frightening. And we started to realize that not only was Dad potentially kind of a wandering risk, but he could be a violence risk for those around him and himself. And we started to have to look for a place to be able to help us take care of my dad. Now, I started searching around Cincinnati, and I toured a number of different places, and they were really nice. They're probably not as cost-effective as we would need, but they had beautiful lobbies, and they would have apartments that looked really homey, and it was really good. And they probably were a really good place that he could go to. But I also realized that where Dad was, and where he was mentally, and as he was, that probably wasn't that important for him because he wouldn't really realize it. And beyond that, we live in Cincinnati. My brother lives in Denver. These are places that Mom and Dad would go and visit and vacation in. It's not where they live. They built their life in Clinton, Indiana. And that's where their friends are. That's where the network is. And in Clinton, there's really one option for Alzheimer's care, one primary option for Alzheimer's care in the city, and that's the Vermilion County Convalescent Center. And so my dad was admitted to and became a resident of what's called the Expressions Unit at VCC. That's the lockdown unit. Now, VCC is not the most glamorous of places, and I admit that I was sad when he was admitted because he was admitted there, but also how it looked, kind of how it felt, and I thought also that with that lockdown piece, you have to punch in a code to go in and out, and that was to keep the residents from fleeing, and I understand that, but it felt like a prison to me, and in a way it was because of that, but the inside, the doors are open, they're not locked, the floors are clean, the beds are made, the people are friendly, and the need for the locks made sense. My mom, she would punch in twice a day, pretty much every day. That whole in sickness and in health thing, that's real. And she would go in and she would feed Dad lunch and dinner. And when we would visit, we would also go in once or twice a day, at least. And we would feed him. Most of the time, or many of the times, my daughter would, so she would come in and feed him. She would, as she was feeding her pappy, she would tell him about what's going on at school or what role she was going to dance in the ballet. We would then gather around a table, and we would play games, and Dad would sit in his chair. And every once in a while, somebody would go over, and we'd sit with him and talk with him, and we would just be with him. Dad was in the facility for over 13 years. And what I came to realize is that the love that was given by the staff, the aides, the nurses, was really pretty much unparalleled, because they recognized that yes, these are patients that need to be in this lockdown area, but they also still contained the person that was there before. And they gave them respect with that. There were times when I would go in the morning, and I would go to Hardee's beforehand. I would get a large black coffee for me and a small black coffee with ice for my dad so he could drink it through a straw. And I would get if you've been to Hardee's, they've got these little round hash browns. He loved the little round hash browns. And so I would come in, and we would have our coffee, and I would grade. I'm a professor, so I would grade, or I would write, or I would tell him some things about what's going on in our life, and sometimes we would just sit there and listen to music. I would feed him his hash browns. And I think that he heard me. He wasn't necessarily the most communicative at this point, but he would smile when I would feed him the hash brown. And so there was a reaction there, and I believe that he heard me. But at this time, I also was able to really see how the nurses, aides, staff, how they interacted with the patients. Not just my dad, not just me, me visiting him, and what the grace that they gave us to really interrupt their whole daily activities, because I would come in and change things because I would sit with Dad. But they would laugh and joke with the residents. So they're getting them out of a chair or into bed or into the bathroom. They would give the residents respect and treat them, as a human, as they are. And that amount of just pure love and care was striking. There's the activities director at VCC's Expressions Unit. Her name is Margot. And Margot, she would, any holiday, they celebrated the holiday. There was decorations, hats, food, all this stuff that she probably brought in on her own dime, just to be able to have these moments with the residents. For my mom, there was never a holiday, or never a birthday or an anniversary where Dad somehow acquired a card and he somehow signed it. And yes, I wholly believe there was still love from Dad to Mom, but really that was also love between these two friends who had forged this relationship in this terribly unfortunate situation. The VCC also would do things outside of the expressions. One time they held a prom for all the residents. And so some of the expressions folks who could come down would come down, but for everybody else in the retirement home, they could dress up in fancy dresses and come and dance to a band. And they opened it up for the whole community. They let them know what was going on. And the community donated dresses and suits for the residents to be able to experience this prom. My mom found a kind of a bib that looked like a tuxedo for my dad, and so I'm sure that he was sitting there in his tuxedo and she was in her fancy dress, and I'm sure they were holding hands, listening to the music, enjoying the food and the lights and all the, especially the music and the activity. as they were just together. And that it was wonderful to be able to have that moment, build that memory, but also hearken back to what existed before. My dad, he died a couple years ago. And as I think a lot of folks do nowadays, we were looking for something in lieu of flowers. And what could we raise money for? And Dad, of course, was involved with all these organizations. And the Alzheimer's Association made a lot of sense. But as we were thinking about what we could do, we realized that the VCC had really given so much to my family, to Mom and to Dad, especially, that we wanted to give something back. And so, all right, in lieu of flowers, we want to give something to the Expressions Unit. And we thought, we would be able to help Margot with some things, and I thought that we would be able to do some kind of upgrade or some kind of cool thing. And then the community started to give, and they continued to give. And eventually, they raised enough money to be able to build a pavilion that's outside of Expressions, but inside of the enclosed courtyard. And this allows the residents to be able to get out there and be in the environment and not just be inside their wing anymore. They could and spend extended time out there. There's a sidewalk that's wide enough for wheelchairs to easily navigate. And that gets to a patio that's covered by this pavilion that all the Expressions residents and their families can be covered from the rain or the snow, hopefully not the snow, the sun. But they could go out there and they have picnics. They play games, they listen to music, and sometimes they're just out there and they just are able to be. It's kind of like a really big gazebo. And what I realized when I was thinking about all of this is that that's really what's important, right? I mean, recognition, success, money, whatever, all of that, that's important and it's good. But family, community, connection, time, love. That love that is freely given and freely received, really, that's really the only thing that matters.
Give it up again for Chris.